The polling booths in Britain have already opened now for probably the most important election since Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. This could reshape Britain. This choice is really between British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Conservatives, who promised to finally take Britain out of the European Union, and Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who promises to take Britain into socialism. Massive new spending, massive new taxes and borrowing, and massive nationalising of businesses. These are absolutely critical choices. But the last day of the campaigning, that was dominated instead by trivialities like claims that Boris Johnson hid in a freezer to dodge talking live on TV to Piers Morgan, which I think is actually true. We'll have our coverage of the British election starting immediately after this show, but joining me is Britain's sharpest columnist, Brendan O'Neill of Spike magazine. Brendan, it's good to see you. I hope the omens are good to see your cheery face, but tell me for a start, what are the real issues facing Britain today with this election? What should be going through people's minds?
I think there's really only one significant issue, which is the democratic deficit that exists in this country, and the fact that in 2016 we voted, 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union, and the political class is either unwilling or incapable of making that happen. It's worth remembering that's why we're having this election. Nobody wanted an election, including Boris Johnson, in fact. No one wants an election in December. It's the first time we've had an election in December for decades. But we have to have this election because the political class has just failed to implement the popular will. And there was a YouGov poll done a couple of weeks ago which asked people what's on your mind in this election, and Brexit came top. We are witnessing a massive political realignment in this country away from left and right and towards Leave versus Remain. That's really the driving force now. So the fundamental question in this election, are we going to vote for someone who respects the democratic will, or are we going to vote for people who disrespect the democratic will?
But you know how it is, Brendan, the immediate issue of an election then over the period of the campaign gets diverted into other things. And I have to say, for me, one critical issue, nevertheless, I mean, I'm totally on board what you've just said, and you know that, but what would Britain really look like under Jeremy Corbyn? His policies, to me, are plainly frightening.
I think Britain under Jeremy Corbyn would be terrible. I really genuinely do. The Labour Party has completely and utterly lost its way. It has drifted away from its founding principles. It's drifted away from the working classes, who it's supposed to represent, but it now looks upon them with contempt. And it has become this illiberal, anti-democratic, identitarian outfit which has nothing in common with the party that was founded 100 years ago. It's a tragedy, in fact. If Corbyn was Prime Minister, we would become an illiberal country. We know that he has a real contempt for the idea of press freedom. He wants to introduce state-regulated press. We know that it would be an anti-democratic country under Jeremy Corbyn because he would revoke the vote for Brexit and force us to have a second referendum. And we know it would be a very divided country because the Corbynista movement is one which completely has embraced the politics of identity and has completely embraced the kind of woke, politically correct agenda which treats everyone as a race or a gender or whatever else it might be. So it would be as if SJWs had taken over the country. If you can imagine what that would be like, that's what Britain would be like under Jeremy Corbyn. Plus, we'd have his ridiculous spending plans, which he can't justify. We'd have more taxes. It would not be a pleasant place for people to live.
But, you know, I'm fully on board, right? And I just think his economic policies, mass nationalising of various industries, higher taxes, as you suggest, business, personal, inheritance taxes, banning private schools, go through the whole lot. A 4-day working week, I mean, for heaven's sake. But all that, I think, would actually wreck Britain. But you tell me, why then are so many voters still supporting him?
Well, that's a great mystery. I wish I had the answer to that question. I mean, some people are voting Labour because they've always voted Labour. You know, there are working class communities who would just never countenance voting for the Tories. And particularly in the north of England and in parts of Wales, you know, there are people who will never ever vote Tory. And so some people are voting Labour out of habit. You know, I kind of understand that to a certain extent, but there are other people, particularly among the kind of upper middle classes, who are voting Labour this time round for one simple reason. They want to stop Brexit, and we've seen a real outburst of tactical voting among the chattering classes in particular, where they are using their vote not to express their political will, and not particularly because they like Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is a deeply unpopular leader across the nation. They're voting for Labour because they want to stop Brexit. So we're seeing a very cynical vote for Labour, and we're seeing The Guardian, for example, publishing an editorial which said, look, we know that Labour has a real problem with anti-Semitism, but you still have to vote for it because they are so desperate to stop Brexit. And a lot of Labour's vote will come from people who are actually anti-democratic.
Brendan, honestly, that editorial, people have got to read it for themselves, because I know analogies with anything to do with Hitler, you know, Godwin's law and all that kind of stuff, and you lose the argument. But I have to say, the left have usually excoriated the German businessmen that held their nose about Hitler's anti-Semitism and said, well, look, his economic policies are right. The Guardian, I don't think, can ever make that criticism again. They're saying, oh, look, we're holding our nose, of course, anti-Semitism, terrible, the Jew hatred, but vote for Jeremy Corbyn because his other policy. I mean, really, it stinks to me. But look, put that to all, I hate to ask you, I mean, it should be a lay-down misère, but what's your tip? Is Boris Johnson going to win?
Oh, it's just so hard to tell at the moment. If you'd asked me that 2 weeks ago,
oh, don't say that, Brendan.
Boris Johnson's getting a stonking majority, and you know, I would have said it's about time we had a majority government. That's actually what this country needs. But the polls have narrowed, and there is now talk of a possible hung parliament, which I think would be a disaster. It's hard to call. There's still a possibility Boris will get the majority, but you know, the one mistake Boris made is that he has presented Brexit as this kind of burden. You know, his slogan, get Brexit done, let's move on, let's just get it out of the way and we can do things that are more important. What I think he didn't realise is that to millions of people, Brexit isn't a burden, it's an opportunity for change, an opportunity to clear out the old technocratic political class and have more democracy. People see it as something very positive. So I think he missed a trick there. And the polls have narrowed, it's become unpredictable, but I'm trusting in the good sense of the British people that they will return a Tory majority rather than take a risk on someone as awful, really, as Jeremy Corbyn.
Brendan O'Neill, my goodness, I hope you are right. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Thank you for all the times you've been on the show this year. You've been an adornment, and I hope to see you next year. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Thanks, Andrew.